This week on OT Exposed Raw, we've got Dale Peterson of Digital Bond and S4 Events, so we're bound to stir up some trouble coming up next. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of OT Exposed Raw, the show where we talk about OT and ICS topics and we don't hold back. This week, we've got a really special guest. Of course, all of our guests are special, but probably none more prolific than our guest this week, Dale Peterson. Let's go ahead and first bring on our co-host with the least or the most, our Dutch oven, Pascal.
You were going to skip me. I know you just wanted to have Dale all to yourself, and I can't blame you. This is huge. I'm very excited to have Dale on. He's been a mentor since I got interested with industrial cybersecurity. So looking forward to this episode.
Well, before we talk about him too much, let's give him a chance to at least defend himself. But first, I think today's topics will be really timely. I think it's with all the regulations and the governance going on. And I think we're going to dive into some stuff with Dale Dale's really passionate about. And, I think there's really nothing up. By the way, I'm also sporting the S4 shirt wherever my, sporting that. Had to for Dale. But let's go ahead and bring him on and stop delaying. Dale, how are you?
I'm good. Hi, guys. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, good to have you on. This is it's weird seeing you here in this perspective. I'm used to seeing on your podcast where you're front and center and you're running things. And I almost kind of want to just hand the show over to you and just be like, can you just run this, or have Liz, help out with the controls.
Maybe at a minimum we need to flip the picture. He should be on top and then we're on the bottom below.
No, you guys are doing a great job. When you started the show, I was wondering if you knew what you got yourselves into, because it's a fair amount of work, but I've been really impressed by the way the show has grown over the 20 some episodes and the way you've been able to keep the cadence up and, quite frankly, the fun level. I think that's something that's maybe a little unique to your show in this ICS security space. So it's going to be fun to be on this.
Cool. Well, thank you. Your show, I like to tell people, your show has inspired us. The OT Exposed Raw show is inspired by Dale Peterson's podcast, but in the style of Joe Rogan. That's kind of how we like to keep it. So, before we jump in, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about, I think I met you in the mid 2000s and really beyond, I don't think I've ever done any work with Digital Bond, but, I've gone to S4 events for as long as I can remember. And, so that's kind of how I know you. I know you as the head honcho at S4. And it's probably this is what we call it. S4 conference is the mothership for ICS community. And so before we get started with our topics, really, I think because our viewer base, we don't need to introduce you. Everybody knows who you are. And so I think that, the user base is probably going to be interested to hear about, and this is not a shameless plug. I'm not going to throw that at you. I'm doing it. So what's coming up with S4? What's new at S4? I know you've put out some blogs and articles talking about it, but just from your own words on my show, as opposed to yours, tell us kind of what's exciting about S4 22, this upcoming conference.
Well, I appreciate that. It's January 25th or 27th in Miami South Beach. You go to s4xevents.com if you want to see the agenda and the speakers, 3 days, 3 stages and all that. I'd like to tell people what it isn't actually to start out. So if you're new to ICS, it's not for you. Everyone is allowed to come. We don't have any hurdles. So if you want to come, please come. But we don't design it for the newcomer. So there's not 101 level stuff there. We don't have a lot of lessons learned, good practices types of presentations. There's some great events like DHS's ICSJWG, the SANS event. API puts on a nice event. So there's a lot of events that cover that. But what we try to do at S4, our tagline is create the future. So we try to get some really smart people down there. And we try to put them in a creative environment and throw a lot of ideas at them that are new, sometimes conflicting, sometimes ideas I absolutely think are wrong. But we throw a lot of ideas at the community, put them in a social event with art around a pool, on a beach, so that they can break out of their patterns. And hopefully what comes out of that is the attendees not only learn what's coming in the next 1 to 3 years, but actually get inspired to help create that future. So that's kind of how we position the event and who we design the event for.
You do have the onboarding, though, the onboarding ramp, which is kind of for newcomers. Or
We
not the
do have-
onboarding, the on-ramp. The on-ramp, that's what I meant to call.
But we have that's online. So, there's 101 level training on ramp on the YouTube channel, 201 level. This year it's the 301 level. So there really isn't any basic beginner material. But again,
Right.
everyone's welcome to come. We don't exclude you, but I just wanted people to know who we designed the event for. And then this year, I think maybe the universe was playing with us. We decided after S420, the theme was no limits, and then COVID hit, which limited us. But what we decided to do, we outgrew stage 2. We used to have to limit stage 2 tickets to 200 people. So we actually have now a second building. Stage 2 seats 600 people. Stage 3 is huge as well. And we took that idea and we said, let's look at everything and say, this is how we did it. Should we change it? So, I mean, some things are really simple, like at the Cabana sessions, we used to have the Cabana session sponsors run an activity. And they hated doing that because they wanted to sell their product. So we, and after that, we failed for 4 years or so. This year we took that over. So we don't require that. We just charged them more and we're doing the activity. So, you'll be doing live art, all sorts of things will be going on there. The other thing we did is, I mean, there's so many examples, but the last one I'll point out is the sponsors. We got so many OT detection and visibility sponsors at S420. So you'd walk around the Cabana sessions, you'd see, a lot of quality sponsors, but we said, no, we want to have a variety and we want to have things that are new. So the attendee learns something. So you'll even notice, I mean, we had 2 free ones and we said, let's find 2 people that are doing things real new. ThreatGen got one of those for your gamification. Idaho State University got the other. So even in our sponsors, we said,
Nice.
What would be of most benefit to our attendees to see? And we just did that throughout. So I think people who have been there for years will see quite a few changes in 22.
Nice. Yeah, I look forward to it. And so Sean McBride is leading the effort there at Idaho State. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's and yes, so since you mentioned it, thank you for mentioning that. But yeah, ThreatGen will be at a Cabana, and we'll also be sponsoring one of the sponsors at the beer bash. So be sure and come join us. But if you haven't been to S4 events yet, I highly encourage you to go, whether you're a newcomer to this industry or not. It is my favorite cybersecurity event of the year, not even speaking about just ICS, all cybersecurity events. It's my favorite. It's my family. So
you had me at Florida and pool time. So what else did you say?
I was just going to say the other thing that's changed a little bit, and this is something that we always hoped, you spend a lot of time on the agenda, but somewhere around 2019, it probably happened much earlier. I recognize that it was the people gathering that was the real win. We have great sessions on 3 stages, but you just walk around and you see the talent talking to each other. And now you're seeing a lot of activities around S4. So there had been the beer ISAC meetings, which, at night gathered 200 people. There's Pwn to Own giving away $300,000 to people that can break systems. There's going to be an ICS for ICS exercise, the first one on the Monday. So there's all these things going around the event. And that's pretty cool because we're really just trying to create this atmosphere where the tribe can get together and figure out how we're going to move this thing forward faster.
Well, it's been very successful so far.
I forgot, how long you've been doing this?
We started in 2007.
Yeah, quite a while already. And you only missed, 2020 in there? 21?
Well, be very worried about 2031 because we missed 2011 and 2021.
There
So
you go.
31 might be another issue, but let's I mean, I don't want to, I'm sure people want to hear about other things. So let's move on.
I got a quick question that I just have to ask, because you've been in cybersecurity and industrial cybersecurity that even ever since forever, right? Even before the big companies were ever interested in cybersecurity. What got you started?
Everything in my life has been dumb luck.
I know the feeling. That's how I met that guy.
That's how I hired Pascal.
Yeah, I got into security because I was late to sign up for the State Department test in college, and they handed me an NSA test, and that got me into being a cryptanalyst. I had a company that was doing general consulting, and in 2000, and a large water utility said, "Hey, can you do a SCADA security assessment?" And Pascal, you'll appreciate this. Consultants usually, when asked that question, say, "Sure." You know, and I had no idea what I did. And once you stumble into this field, you find you either love it or it's not for you. And for me, just actually going out and seeing the physical systems and also seeing all the work that needed to be done. You know, once I saw it the first one, then it was just, how can I do this full time?
I remember watching some videos you did pretty shortly after that, I believe, about, hey, yeah, you can use Nessus scanners in the industrial environment. I think that might be the engagement you're talking about. But yeah, it was always fun to watch.
Bandolier. Anyway, so yeah, let's get on with today's topics. I'm pretty sure viewers are chomping at the bit to hear what mess we get into. So one of the things that I really wanted to touch on that really what kind of piqued my interest whenever we knew where you were getting on the show was your article series, specifically around ICS security maturity, because a lot of topics that we've talked about on this show have centered around best practices around all things OT cybersecurity, from monitoring to basic blocking and tackling to standards to the directives. And I think that this is an area where, you know, Pascal and I have a little bit of disagreements about the order of things. And I think that that's one thing that you were pointing out in the article series, and I'll bring that up here. And let's see, the link to that is there. And that's Dale's article, part 1 on the ICS security maturity model, what to do in what order. And you talk about some of the recommended order of things, the recommended priorities they don't necessarily make sense. And I think that I agree with you on some, and Pascal probably doesn't. Let's unwrap that and unpack that a little bit and talk about that article. And number one, you know, what you see is done wrong, and then also kind of how, in contrast, some of the current standards, the TSA, the CISA directives, and all that, how they fit into that. Where do we you feel that they're wrong, and where they're on the right track? And so, like, I'll kind of leave that as an open question for you to start.
It's funny. I don't even mind when someone comes up with a different order than me. It's more, I like to look at what the thought process is that gets you there. And I put out this Friday News and Notes newsletter, and there was a quote that I pulled from an article in there that I think was really applicable. And it was, let's see, I wrote it down here. The defining feature of safetyism, they were against this concept of safetyism, is the displacement of judgment by procedure. And I see that happening a lot in our space, built around this concept of cyber hygiene, where they say, this is a good thing to do. It has been proven to be good. And so this must be done. And I won't argue that almost all those things are good things, but when we have this long list of things we could do, we should be using our judgment, saying, if we spend our resources on this, is this where we're getting our risk reduction? And I think, given that there's so much work to do, those decisions are really important, especially with all the attention we're getting now in this space. With the government and that saying you have to do all these things. If we burn ourselves out doing things that don't really move the needle, we might not get another chance like this.
Yep.
Now, I will say that one thing that Rob Lee and I go back and forth on this. Rob Lee's, and we've done this online too, so on screen, so I'm not betraying anything. His thought is you have to do it all. That the day between picking and choosing is over. But to me, I think that's not practical. I think we live in the real world. You have limited resources.
There's no company, unless you have really deep pockets, there's no company that can do that all at once. Yeah. Right. I think you're absolutely right. And it's also on top of that, it's a personal decision making. What am I going to tackle first? Because you got this plate and people are throwing stuff on there. You should be doing segmentation. You should be doing architecture. And all of these things make sense. But then personally, you need to look at it. What makes sense for budget, my environment, the kind of industry I'm in, the amount of people I can dedicate to it. And then you can dedicate certain times to certain tasks. But I don't see anybody doing it all at once. That plate gets too big for that.
Yeah, and I think that plays right into one of our viewers mentioned you should do it all, quote unquote, but with a priority on what matters first. And I think that's what you were getting at, Dale, when you said you don't mind when somebody has a different order, because that's the way that I personally feel is that, you want to strive to do it all, but in reality, you have limited resources. So it really depends on where you are at in your program, because debates that Pascal and I've had in the past is, the whole, okay, there's so much talk right now about focusing on you have to have visibility in your asset inventory first, and you have to get monitoring. And there's so much focus on putting monitoring first that I disagree with that. Sometimes you may have an opportunity or may be right for you to do monitoring first, but other times, depending on where you're at in your program, you may need to put up your firewall first, or you may need to segment your network first, but in your article, the thing that I agree with the most, and I don't necessarily know they agree with the order, but what I agree with most, and the one that's most important to me, is identifying and hardening your attack vectors. And I think that right there plays right into what your situation is. Understanding where your attack vectors are is going to tell you what you should do first. And I guess maybe that does kind of play into monitoring, but to me, it's more of an assessment thing. Thoughts?
Well, this ties in a little bit. We've had some sessions on this, and we've seen a little bit of this with this never next now patching idea. So people say you should be applying patches. OT systems are unpatched, and that's true. They're unpatched, and in a perfect world, everything would be patched, everything would be supported and such. But your value of patching maybe 1 to 5% of your assets and really hardening those that are on the attack path is where you're going to get most of your risk reduction. So rather than saying, I'm going to try to touch everything quarterly or annually, I'd rather see you touch those 1 to 5% in days or hours when something happens. Especially things like your firewall or your remote access appliance or something like that, or a jump server that you're allowing in a DMZ or somewhere else. Those things just need to be immediate, and the payback in terms of risk reduction is huge there. And I just don't see a lot of that. Instead, I see this generic advice: apply patches.
You know what? But you're right. But in order to get there, in order to identify those systems that are more critical than others, guess what you need to do first? Proper asset management. So you need to know what you have installed and the state of it, the owners or whatever details that you need to make those decisions to say, yep, that's a firewall. That's more important than the firewall that's sitting below it. So if we make sure that the top firewall that's sitting between enterprise and the DMZ is taken care of first, then we have a little bit of a lead time on other assets. But in my opinion, asset management is the key starting point.
We might disagree there a little bit, but maybe not. So it depends. It depends what you mean. Like, some people think you need complete visibility and complete asset management. Like, to accomplish what you were saying, I don't need to know what my panel's operating systems are.
Yeah.
I don't need to know the firmware versions of my PLC cards. There's a lot of things I don't need to know to do that. I do have to, when I create that perimeter, I need to know my firewall rule set, so I know what could be accessed through the perimeter and what could be accessed through an attack path. So again, it's almost the same thing where you say asset management. I'd almost put that in the same category as patching. Yes, you need some asset management. You need maybe your critical asset management, and then as you get more mature, you can roll it all out more broadly.
Yeah, I have two comments about that. Number one, is, I think that goes back to your attack vectors too, right? Because if you're talking about the low-hanging fruit issues in attack vectors, so for example, the number one attack vector for malware and ransomware getting in is through social engineering or phishing emails or spear phishing, to go deeper. And for that sort of hardening, you don't need to do asset inventory first. You don't have to have an understanding of your assets to harden that type of attack surface. So some attack surfaces and attack vectors require you to understand what and where your assets are, and some don't.
Right.
And then the second thing that I would say would be, and this plays into what one of our viewers said, it's all about risk. And if you don't equate your cybersecurity strategy back to the core premise and the reason why we do cybersecurity, which is it is a risk to the business, to safety, to something, that drives everything.
100%.
You got to know what you have, though, because you got to be able. And I agree, you might not have to know every single little detail up front right away, because it's an evolving step, right? You start with a certain amount of knowledge, then you build your defenses around that, and you start adding in more knowledge, and you adapt your defenses. But you got to know what you have before you can do any kind of planning and budgeting.
Well, I guess we're going to disagree. And this was the article, and I think that's, so let's say, and I've run into these, I'm sure you have as well. Let's say you're running into a manufacturer who has multiple sites, and their enterprise network and their OT network is one network, no segmentation between them.
I never see those. I've never seen those in my life.
I've seen a couple this year, so they still exist. At that point, I don't care what's in my OT network. I want to put that perimeter in place. I don't need visibility. Maybe I need enough visibility of the communications to put that perimeter in place. So this is where you can get in this argument. What do we mean by asset visibility? I need enough to put that in place, but I don't need much. And that's kind of what I went through on that list. And I would say, for example, hardening the attack paths. Well, once I have that perimeter in place, I know what's allowed through that perimeter, and I'm going to harden everything directly accessible through that perimeter. Again, I only need probably 5 to 10% visibility to accomplish that. So I think there's a lot of things that you would do prior to visibility, in my view.
Well, I think that just like some attack vectors don't require knowledge of all your assets, I think some attack vectors don't necessarily need perimeter hardening either. So, for example, malicious USB drops or insertion, right? So your perimeter is not going to protect you against malicious USB type things and everything like that. But there's an exception to every rule, right? Which I think it all goes back to what we said initially, which is number one, what is your risk? What are your attack vectors to your risk? And it's all circumstantial to your situation.
Well, and that was pretty high up on the list. That was number 4. And I think you could argue where some of these belong. I would have no problem with someone changing the ordering. I guess I'd always ask, though, what risk reduction are you achieving by these high element things? Is it just making you feel good that when the auditors come and they say, did you apply patches or did you, upgrade a Windows XP system deep on a panel? You can say, yes, I did, but that really hasn't moved the risk needle at all.
Right. I agree.
That's actually an excellent point there. Every individual measure in that list, taken out of context and applied in the wrong order, doesn't necessarily make things better, right? If you only do the patching, like you said, but you don't work on the perimeter, how much do you really improve?
Yeah. One of the things, I don't know if you guys have seen it, and Pascal, you're there, so it won't happen anymore. But I've seen large companies like Ernst & Young and Accenture and IBM and others. Sometimes now they're getting better. Now they have 50, 100 or hundreds of OT consultants. But before they had those, they would send their IT teams in to do an analysis, and they would come, the board would hire them, and they'd come in and they'd measure the OT systems against their IT criteria. They'd come up with this missing list of things. And that would be the highest priority, because the board hired or the CEO or the board hired this person Ops had said we got it all under control. The board hires this third party who says all these things, and now they're forced to do all that stuff. What I really have been encouraging, through my content and with my customers, encouraging them to do is get in front of that. Whatever your strategy is, you have to present that to the board or to senior executive management beforehand and get buy-off that this is the way we're going to address risk, or you're going to get stuck doing a lot of things either because of regulations or these consultant reports or something else that, don't really move the risk needle.
Yeah. Most OT environments look really, really good on a consultant's report, because as soon as you aim that Nessus scanner on one of those environments, you're going to find all kinds of good stuff. You'll be like, look at that, you're all red. Look what I found. Please pay me right now. Yeah. Useless.
Whereas if you are ahead of that and you tell management, look, we're not patching these because they're insecure by design. Yes, we know this thing has all these vulnerabilities, but by the way, it also allows you to upload firmware with no authentication. So, we're not accomplishing a lot by patching it. It's a conscious decision. You get management buy-off. Then when that report comes, you're not tagged.
And give different options, right? Okay, so we know these systems cannot be patched, but here's our solution for it. You do segmentation, you do endpoint protection or endpoint application whitelisting, actually, for some of these systems. So you give them solutions that help them stay secure while they still have the restrictions of not being able to patch their systems.
Hey, Clint, curious with you, if I can flip the tables here, RTO, where your recovery time objective was on there. And I know you do a lot with incident response and talk to people about gamification of incident response and such. Are you seeing companies really stepping up their understanding of their RTO and their ability to really recover post-ransomware? To me, this is the gift. It's real easy now to say, hey, imagine ransomware got in and you had to rebuild everything with an IP address. How long does that take you? Is that acceptable? Are you seeing much response that way?
So initially, I guess, going back a year or two ago, initially it all depended on whether such a thing was in their incident response plan. Because that's something that should be outlined in your incident response plan. Right. And it wasn't really looked at as much. I think and ironically, it's all the ransomware attacks that have made people look at this. And now we are starting to see people are paying attention to more detail in the incident response plan and putting in the time to recover type of thing. And I think also, and this is going to sound like a plug, but it's not, whenever you perform your incident response exercises properly, and if you make your recovery time, your response time, and all of those metrics as part of your evaluation, it makes people pay attention to it. And then now it becomes a thing. And so I think the answer to that is, number one, it depends on their incident response plan and how mature it is and how aware they are of that. And number two, how they're performing their incident response exercises, their tabletop exercises, as to whether or not that is a performance objective or a key measurement.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fun to throw that grenade on the table and then just watch and guide the discussion. I've really enjoyed that over the last year because ransomware has finally made them stop arguing it.
Yeah.
So now they say, okay, ransomware comes in, business owner, what is the RTO? Ops, what do you think the RTO is? How, and then you hear some numbers and then it's like, really? How would you do that? And, and you see these things swing wildly from, oh, the RTO has to be an hour, but then they'll have other outages that cause days of outage, and so you see these wild things and it's like, okay, it's an RTO. You want it to be an hour. This is the cost. Are you willing to spend that much money? Well, maybe we don't need it to be an hour. And those conversations are really fascinating. Both pre-exercise and then post-exercise, I think.
Right. Yeah. And that's the timely comment by one of our viewers that RPO and RTO is shifting. High availability is not disaster recovery when it comes to ransomware. And I think that's definitely a good point.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, talking about, and you mentioned earlier, risk, regulation, all these things. I think it's a good segue to move into how we view and how you view it, and I guess our opinions on how we view the order of security maturity model, and what order we're going to do in things. Because, I guess I could start some controversy here and talk a little bit about, because the industry is so heavy on pushing, got to get monitoring in place first. We all have different opinions on that. Maybe we'll touch on that. But first, and especially because it's part of your predictions. There's so much I want to talk about this episode. We won't have enough time to talk about it.
Do something. Start something.
So let's talk about your opinion, our opinions on how the recent TSA pipeline security guidelines, the CISA directives, how that plays into what our opinion is on the order of precedence on risk management, and we should be calling it risk management as opposed to just the security maturity model, because it's all about risk. But you had a great conversation with Patrick about some of these TSA pipelines and the CISA directives. And so what do you feel about their relevance or their accuracy, and how they're getting it right or wrong in your view of security maturity?
Well, there's a lot of things wrong. It's one of those things. It's one of those things where I actually, I write down ideas for articles, and one of the ideas was, is the attention really a good thing? Normally we say, now we got senators talking about two-factor authentication. This has got to be a good thing, right? That we're getting all this attention to this. But then you see some of the results of that attention, and I'm not sure it's a good thing, but I think it is. I think that probably won't end up being an article. But I see two main issues. One is so many different sets of recommendations and regulations. Even if you just look at CISA, we've got the NIST framework that they've been behind for a while. We've got a couple of different lists of things that you should do. Which one do I listen to? And now you've got TSA coming out with lists, and we just had the surface transportation list from them. We had the pipeline list, and now we had the surface transportation list. And it's just all these sorts of controls that appear to be panic moves to say, we have a problem. We have to put something out there real quickly to say, do all these things. So I've been really disappointed in that. I think it's adding a lot of heat, but not a lot of light to the situation. And I also think it's just confusing people and wasting resources. So I'm hoping someone gets their arms around this thing and says, this is how we're going to approach it. But I don't know if that'll happen.
I think you're right in that a lot of this is a knee-jerk reaction by government entities because they feel like they have to, right? I mean, it's a lot of politics involved too, I think, in that you feel like you have to do something because that's your job to do something. And so they have to put something out. And so now every different agency feels like they have to have their thing to justify their existence almost.
Mm-hmm. It's like that scene in Spaceballs where they're at the helm,
never mind.
And the guy's like, oh, this is epic, do something. And the guy next to him is like, to the next guy, do something. And then they go like 3 or 4 till somebody hits a button or something really simple to counteract what's happening. But I think that's happening here too. And we made fun of some of the TSA directives that came out as a result of this. A couple.
I believe horse shit was the exact
words. Horse shit is the exact words. Yeah, I got them written down here just so I wouldn't forget. But yeah, that kind of stuff evolves from that, and I'm hoping the quality goes up, and we come to a mutual agreement of how we're going to present what are the best steps for most organizations to do, right? Because don't forget, there's so many different organizations, so many different environments, but commonly there should be a set where we can say you do these 5 to 10 major things, and you're going to improve your security by 90%. I believe that's possible.
You run into a few things there. One is if you give people too long of a list, it's very hard to digest. This is one of the issues well, yeah, no. I mean, 10 is fine, but I'm just saying, like, when I see some of these, and something will happen, and CISA will put out an alert or an advisory, and they'll create this long laundry list of all these good practices that they're not wrong. They're good practices, but then you don't know which one of those should I really do. Which is the thing. And I've always thought that they should be focusing on like a control every quarter and just beating it down so that the C levels are asking their own teams, hey, do we have 2-factor authentication for our remote access, something like that, and then go to the next one. I will say though that, you called it horseshit. I gave the pipeline stuff my fail of the month 2 months in a row. The TSA pipeline guidelines. Their surface transportation ones that came out just yesterday were better. They required an executive to be in charge, notification of the government, which I think isn't wrong, but I'm kind of curious what the heck the government's going to do after they get notified. So far, I think that's
fine, yeah.
An open book. Have an incident response plan, makes sense. And then the last one was identify vulnerabilities. And that one is the one where I think they probably should have said do a risk assessment instead of vulnerability assessment. Yeah. And I really wonder, what do they consider insecure by design protocols and devices? Their network is full of these. Does that make the list of vulnerabilities? That's one of the things that that DHS has gone back and forth on over the decades. Sometimes they call them vulnerabilities, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, and you can't, the operator can't do anything about insecure by design. So other than mitigating controls.
So far, I think that's one of the things, if we were to get a little more positive, one of the things I'm excited about is, I think if we're courageous enough, we're at the point where we could see some really cool things coming out. Like, I'm very excited about level 1 right now, the PLCs and the RTUs and the controllers and such. I mean, they're finally getting some secure protocols. They're finally getting things like signed firmware. But we actually have seen, and there's some research that's going to be presented, people talking about endpoint detection at level 1, where they're actually pulling apart logic and looking for things that shouldn't be in logic.
Right.
That's pretty cool stuff.
Is SenSaber doing that? I don't know much about their product, but I think, are they one of the ones doing that?
They don't have a presentation on it. They're still a little bit dark, so I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. But I think people are starting to look at that. And even cooler, I think, is the idea of virtualizing level 1, putting everything but the IO at level 1 in a container. And now all of a sudden you've got really quick recovery. You've got the capability to update these things that they say don't touch them for 2 decades. You can update them. And I think, this is kind of a crazy prediction I've made, but I think that's what's finally going to move the needle on securing level 1. So we have things out there that I think are possible and really cool. And I just wonder, imagine a world where you could rebuild your entire ICS through orchestration in 3 to 6 hours.
Oh yeah.
Software-defined automation.
Yeah.
Right?
In a world.
Yeah. But just think about that. How does that change the risk equation if you can rebuild everything to a clean image in 3 to 6 hours? I mean, that just changes everything.
I don't see why they couldn't do it either, right? The technology is there. We have soft PLCs. We have the architecture. We have the virtualization platforms that can do this stuff. I think it's a matter of time. And I know certain companies have been toying with the idea already. So I'm not going to name names right here, but some of these companies have invested some proper money in looking into options.
Well, the open process automation area foundation or forum, whatever they call it, OPA, that ExxonMobil started and is now a public group. They're really looking at this. Seaplane has done some things where they have shown they could rebuild things extremely quickly, in a matter of hours, but they weren't down to level 1 yet. They were just doing all the computers and switches. And that's something that you guys know is certainly possible today. It's just a question of setting it up. But now if you extend that to level 1, that's really cool.
So I'd like to touch, this one. I'd like to touch on that. I have mixed feelings of bringing it to the cloud. I think being a controls engineer, this feels completely wrong to me. But being a security person, I see the benefit of putting it in the cloud, right? For analytics, for shared insight in things. What's your opinion on that?
Well,
PLC in the cloud.
That's a tough one. I mean, certainly we got to be clear though that having these be containers doesn't mean they're in the cloud, right? I mean, that's not what I was suggesting. It's just rather than this hard box PLC that's really hard to update, it's just everything's a container except for the IO, and it's sitting in a device still in a similar architecture. You could move some of that to the cloud. To me, what's more interesting, obviously, the process variable anomaly detection in the cloud, I think is the no-brainer. You take the digital twin and you start to do this. We saw GE's Digital Ghost do this, where they said, hey, this parameter doesn't make sense given the state of the process, and send back what it really should be to the control system. So I think that's out there. You know what? I'm more interested, and this is another one of those crazy things. I'm more interested in operator replaced by machine learning in the cloud than I am PLC in the cloud.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think PLC in the cloud will end up being a thing. And by the way, I know who that viewer is, BH, and I can tell you that he was completely joking and being facetious.
Yeah, no.
By the way, good to see you. I'm not gonna dox you in front of everybody, but I see you. So yeah, there's so much controversy. I remember back in the day when everybody started talking about SCADA in the cloud, and I'm like, that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. But we are starting to see operator control in the cloud already. And,
Yep.
when you talk about, digital oil field transformation and what is it or industry 4.0 or whatever it is. I don't know. But I mean, we are starting to see lots of customers move certain operations into the cloud.
Yeah. Well, just think about how, and this varies by sector. So, if you're in a sector where this isn't the way, don't get too mad. But there are many sectors where operators are trained saying, when this happens, you do this. When this happens, you do this. When this happens, you do this. And 99% of what they do is that. I mean, what is better suited for machine learning? You've got years of that data in the system, and you know what to do. So you could get into this model, and the guys from, where are they from? Maybe Accenture, or the Human Plus Machine guys. There's this great book, Human Plus Machines, and they talk about this idea where you're going to move more of that sort of thing to machine learning, and then you're going to have more engineers. So maybe instead of having 4 operators, that's replaced by an engineer for that 0.1% or 1% where things just don't make sense. And the model says, hey, what I'm seeing here just doesn't jibe with any of the data I have. A person needs to look at this. This doesn't make sense. It's outside the guardrails.
Yeah. And I think that the biggest fear that people have with there's 2 main things, right? When you put it into the cloud, obviously exposed data that they're afraid of, but then there's the exploitability. But I think when it comes to AI, there's the issue of it becomes a safety issue because AI can make mistakes, but so can humans. But I think as long as you had human override, or at least a portion of it where a human was still able to supervise it and override, that I think, and you let AI do the heavy lifting, I think there's a future in that.
It's starting to sound like Skynet.
Well, you have, Brian Owen calls these closed loop systems where, he has open loop and closed loop cloud. So open loop, you send data to the cloud, it does predictive analysis, and you get back an email or some report saying, hey, here's what we learned. Closed loop, where they actually send back commands that could change the process. But you have all different ways of doing that. You can say, for example, you can make changes within this range. You can change the boiler within this range, but not outside that range from there. You can have things that say you can only provide this information, but it has to be acknowledged and accepted by someone on site before the command takes place. So we're going to have to be a lot smarter. And who knows, maybe it relies on more safety and protection systems to prevent the really bad things from happening. I just like to see a lot more experimentation in this area and a lot more, just not the knee jerk, no, that'll never work sort of thing.
So what about this? So, all right. So you made some really good predictions in the monitoring market. I mean, you called that one, it came really big. And then you really kind of, in my opinion, I think you helped drive that entire narrative in that entire market. But then it was the S-bomb, right? And that's kind of going right now. I mean, do you see yourself making do you predict yourself making a prediction in the future on an AI / machine learning driven, monitoring SCADA market? Because I think that could be on the next frontier in the next market for ICS.
Yeah, I think I think that's going to happen, and it's some people in our industry get really excited about security in the cloud, and I think as I mentioned, I think process variable anomaly detection is kind of the holy grail of detection. I think it eventually, if we can get there, it's the answer, much better than anything we have today. I think that's going to be the answer. But I see that where our jobs are going to be more in securing and enabling these services in the cloud rather than the cloud providing security. I worry a lot. Most of the cloud services, and I see this, I work with people that are offering the cloud services and people that are buying the cloud services. And more often than not, the approach they're taking is we're going to trust each other. We're going to create a secure pipe between the two of us, and anything goes through that pipe. And I just hope we can stop that before that happens. I've been in cases where we put into Finos to say, yes, you can do that, but the only thing you can do is change this boiler between these settings. But if we didn't do that, we would just be relying on the goodwill of the cloud. And I think as a security community, these things are coming. We need to be in there and say, yes, this is great. We love it. But by the way, you've got to put this in place.
Yeah, I think that especially when we talk about introducing the conversation of AI and machine learning for behavioral analysis and anomaly detection, because those are related but two different things. I think that when you're talking about logic specific, right, layer 1 going into up through layer 3, logic and control, the logic is so specific to each process, right, in each organization, and that it does get, I guess maybe you have a training phase or something like that, but I think that's why it's the holy grail, and that's why no one's solved it yet, is because logic that is good on one process is bad on another. And I think the complexities there of determining what is bad behavior, what is good behavior specific to each process, I think that's the real challenge.
I'm not going to agree with. I don't agree with that completely, because there are things that are pretty standard. For example, the breach at the water treatment facility last year. If some AI would have been watching that set point for the last month, and it would have seen that set point varies maybe 100 up, 100 down. Now all of a sudden it's going to go 1,000,000 up. That's pretty, stuff like that is pretty easy to detect. Temperatures, hey, the set point for this boiler has always been around 400 degrees. Why did it all of a sudden jump to 1,000, right?
Yeah, I wasn't using it as a blanket statement, saying it's all, but I mean, there are those cases, those circumstances that makes it difficult.
I think you're both right. I think, Pascal, I think you're talking about you can do some things with unstructured machine learning where you know nothing about it. But Clint, I've been looking at that same issue is, how will they create digital twins quickly and efficiently across a variety of systems, where even if you're a utility, all your power plants are a little different. So there's not a digital twin for your power plant. You need that. This is, if you go to this area, one of the things I keep trying to do to myself is, if I believe something, then I try to flip it around. I'm working on my no limits, mini keynote at the beginning. That's like our tagline. One of the ones that didn't make the keynote is Joe Weiss's level 0 issue. So, Joe Weiss, well, he's very big. His pounding the last 3 years or so has been, we need almost a secondary monitoring network at level 0, between level 0 and level 1, to tell us when those sensors aren't right, either because they've hacked or they failed. My immediate reaction to that has always been, well, that's probably on the list, but pretty low on the list. We've got a lot of things we need to do before that. But I always challenge myself to say, well, let's flip this around. Let's say he's right. What would you need to do? And I think you could start asking interesting questions, saying, what if I could monitor 2% of level 0 for this? Like, what if I created this small network, and how would I select which 2% I monitor? And could I build some machine learning algorithm around that and create this very small, lightweight secondary sensor network that could detect a high probability of some issue happening in the network. And I just really think, I guess what I keep coming back to is what I keep seeing in our industry that we need to change is we get locked into these ideas that this is the way it's done. And things are changing fast. And if we don't start to come up with better solutions, we're going to get stuck with the old solutions that won't work very well.
So if you tie this into the discussion we had earlier about virtualizing level 1, you could make it feasible that once you start virtualizing your PLCs, then you can make a quick copy of that to your cloud services, right? So there's your digital clone, and then having those additional sensors sitting on level 0 could give you the extra overview of, hey, this is what we're expecting to see the process do right now, but in reality, this is what's doing it. There's too much of a deviation, so we're going to report on that.
Yeah.
You know, I guess my thing is, it goes back to, and this has been my argument with Joe the whole time, has been, I guess, you know, this is a huge tangent. We could spend days talking about this, but I guess, you know, when you talk about level 0 sensors, unless they're IP connected, in order to hack them, you have to be physically at them.
Yep.
You know, and so that reduces your attack surface. It reduces the likelihood. And to me, and Joe got mad at me for saying this because I said it on LinkedIn on one of his posts, but it's like, there's no, at that point, you know, there's no difference between hitting the thing with a hammer, taking a piss on it, or hacking it. It's all the same result. You're altering that sensor. And so it's not, to me, that's not a cyber attack. That's not a cyber vector.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that. I'm just saying, I use that as an example, and as I said, it didn't make the cut into my mini keynote because it wasn't one of the better ones. But I do think we have to challenge ourselves if we have a, you know, not every day, but periodically, if we have a strong feeling this is wrong that someone else says, it says, well, what would it take for that to be true?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And if I agreed with this, if I agreed that that was the way that we need to monitor this, how would I do it? What would be the most efficient, best way of doing that? And I think we need a lot more of that in our sector.
Yeah, I think, you know, Mr. BH, I almost said his name, but he, you know, has a good point. You know, sensor drift is an issue as old as time. So it's not just a hacker thing. It's not just a security monitoring thing. It's just an operations monitoring thing.
There's people dedicated on almost every company staff that's what they do. They look at the sensors, they recalibrate them. They do that day in, day out. So yeah, it's as old as time.
Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, I think this is an interesting comment from our friend Peter. Everybody knows Peter, but so you know, they've been using AI and machine learning modeling, you know, in DCS for some time now, and it's increased over time. So I would definitely be interested to have conversations with Peter about what they're doing and how they're doing it, if he's allowed, because I'm curious to see how far that's gone in DCS and where they're going with it. To Dale's point about, you know, that's probably something that's on the forefront.
Well, but I think one of the nice things about machine learning is you can identify unexpected correlations. So I can't remember, I think it was 2010, we had someone that essentially did an example of process variable anomaly detection in a substation. And it was very manual. They kind of mapped it out. They said, when this happens, this should happen. They created all these calculations that they understood. But I think what would be really cool is if you could say, I've got this site and I've got all these PLCs spread across the site. And it would be really cool to identify unexpected correlations across different PLCs. So if someone replayed a PLC, it wouldn't make any sense with this other correlation. And not just like pressure and temperature or accelerator getting pushed down and the engine revving, but things that you just would not expect. And I think that's where the machine learning has helped us more than the traditional modeling did.
Yeah. You know, and there's also the issue of, you know, and this is hardly relevant, but it's worth noting that there's so much buzzwording about AI and machine learning and the different use cases of what machine learning really is and AI really is, that it's hard to cut through all the chaff that's out there about, okay, are you actually building an ML solution with real behavior analysis, or are you just doing some sort of anomaly detection and calling it AI.
Yeah.
There's a trend. Look at my AI.
Yeah. A lot of signature-based things with the sprinkling of AI that get called AI. I'm curious for you guys. You're both involved. What are you seeing on the detection versus incident response case? So, like in terms of ordering, we were talking about maturity levels, and I had basic detection, but not the full-blown, Dragos Nozomi and such detection. But I had incident response before deploying those products. Where do you guys stand on that?
Exactly the same. Most of the time, it's incident response, but not incident response. It's they found something, and there's big giant panic. People do all kinds of stuff to get running again, and then they start thinking about maybe we should do this officially. So then they're going to start up a proper incident response program, start putting detection sensors in there and all that stuff. So yeah, it's most of the time it's panic first, incident response, and then detection.
Yep, exactly. That's the standard. Now, your larger organizations, they have their stuff together. I mean, your larger organizations, but they've been around since the beginning of time. But for those organizations that are smaller, mid-size and smaller, a lot of pipelines, a lot of smaller electric co-ops, those sorts of things. Yeah, it's, oh shit, we don't have anything in place. Okay, we don't want this to happen again. Let's put something in place. Maybe we should monitor to see if it's happening. And that's the same situation I've seen.
And you know what the beauty of that is, though? The oh shit phase. It takes so much effort to get back running again, but you have all of that data. Now we know it took us $1 million and a week worth of time to recover. So what's our security budget? It's $1 million, right? Because that's what we're trying to prevent. Because if it happens again, we'll be at the same mercy of our systems.
So what you're saying is that everybody should go through an incident.
Yeah, if that's what it takes to get it going, then yeah, by all means, just.
Well, it's funny. So if someone, and I work with people that do this, they buy one of these products, one of these OT visibility and detection products. Almost without fail, the first thing they do is they create their asset inventory, right? That was kind of the myth of this. These products started out with detection. Nobody was ready for detection, so they started to sell them for asset inventories. The next step is kind of interesting. You have an asset inventory and you have some forensic data if you're storing it properly. But if you're going to spend money, then do you spend money on monitoring that tool, or do you spend money on incident response retainer? And I've actually been pushing most people to spend it on incident response retainer, because what good is it doing me to have someone monitoring this and analyzing it if we can't get in there and fix it?
Unless you have the staff to be dual purposed, right? That can do your forensics and
that's the Rob Lee. The Rob Lee would say you need to do both.
Yeah.
And he's not wrong, but if you only have a pile of money, what do you do first?
And that's my recommendation. And since actually, we at ThreatGen don't actually do incident response anymore. Right. And so I can say this without sounding like a plug that, I recommend you get an IR retainer. That's probably the best way to go.
And for most companies, that makes sense, right? Because they don't have the budget to have dedicated staff on their own side to do that. So give somebody some money to be on call if you do see something weird. Maybe even give them some money to keep an eye on the logs for you. Because most companies that I've been involved with, they are very good at engineering. They're very good at producing products. Yeah. The security, maybe not so much, and they don't want to be interested in it. So outsource it.
Yeah. And I'll say, touche, Grayson. Yes, you're right. I know of some small organizations that do have their stuff together more than larger organizations. But I was just using a good example. Yeah. But anyway, just using an example, because now, like, I'm sure some of my smaller to mid-sized customers are going to come at me now with chainsaws. But
they're in front. They're knocking on your door right now.
Yep. So we are actually, and then these conversations can go on forever, and I wish they could, because I love this conversation because it went from kind of like, let's talk about Dale's grievances with the security maturity and regulations, and then we went into this whole new frontier conversation of ML and AI and detection. And I love that. And that's exactly how I like these conversations to go, and give us a lot of food for thought. But we are at the end. And so unfortunately, we are going to have to say goodbye. But Dale, it was great having you on. This was a real treat. And it's spawned some great conversations and some food for thought. And I think that, if you're up for it sometime in the future, probably after absolutely after S4, I'd like to have you on, sometime next year to revisit these conversations, to see if we've had some things evolve and to see if we can, talk about some of these things, the predictions, and see if they came to fruition. But I'd definitely like to have you on again in the future to continue these conversations. So thank you very much.
Oh, yes. You're welcome. And I've got to get Pascal on the show sometime too. I've like 2/3 through your book.
Hey, I was wondering about that.
And it's a really challenging book, so I want to talk to you about it. It's like it covers so much ground, and it's like I'm really struggling, like who this book would serve best. There's a lot of good stuff in that book, but so we'll talk about that. Yep. I'll send you an invite. We'll get you on there. There's definitely some great sections in that book, and I've covered probably, as I said, probably 600 of the 800 pages, but not in order. I've actually kind of hopped around, but we'll have to get you on.
I would love to do that. Absolutely.
Well, everyone, this is actually going to be our last official episode of the year because of the holidays coming up and everybody going on break and everything like that. I do still have some fun things planned that I'll still do in place of the official OT Exposed episodes. But so we'll still have some things going on, but I think this is a great way to close out the year of the official episodes. Thanks, Dale, for being on. We'll keep everybody posted on when our next official OT Exposed episode will be on, which will be probably the first week of January. So again, thanks, Dale, for being on. Thanks again, Pascal. And to everybody, all of our viewers, thank you very much. And we will see you next time. Take care.
Take care.